The Crawford family, once at the top of the global rich list, suddenly went bankrupt. Mr. and Mrs. Crawford died in a plane crash. The once radiant Crawford heiress lost both her parents overnight and was saddled with hundreds of millions in debt. When her creditors had her backed into a corner, about to kill herself by burning charcoal in her tiny apartment, I was the one who charged through the thick smoke to carry her out. Chloe leaned against my shoulder and asked in a raspy voice, "Why did you save me?" I stared at her intently. "Because as long as you're alive, there's hope." I had been abandoned by my parents, bullied by my classmates, and insulted by customers. Saving Chloe was like saving the desperate person I once was. I made up my mind and said, "I'm not going to Georgetown Law. I can sell fish to pay for your education." Chloe froze, her eyes instantly welling up with tears. I smiled. "The tuition at Georgetown is too expensive. You're going to Harvard. It's a better investment." And so we came to depend on each other, living in a tiny, dilapidated apartment less than 100 square feet. I worked 3 jobs a day and was utterly exhausted. Chloe's concern for me eased all my weariness. She tutored constantly, just so I could eat a little better, and she would even crouch by my chaotic fish stall and scale fish with her own hands. This continued until Chloe became a household name, topping the list of young billionaires. I sat in a corner at her company's IPO launch, watching her in a long gown, poised and eloquent, surrounded by a crowd of fawning elites. In that moment, I smelled myself. I had sprayed on the cologne she'd given me, but it couldn't mask the scent of fish that clung to me. Chloe personally announced she was hiring Julian Vance as her chief legal officer. He was the most handsome guy at Harvard, and his father was a titan in the legal world. Everything I owned, from head to toe, wasn't worth the change he paid for his tie. They stood shoulder to shoulder, a perfect couple. The press conference felt more like their engagement party. I cried that night. I sat in our apartment and drank an entire case of beer, but it wasn't enough to numb the pain. The Chloe who gave me a soda tab as if it were a ring, the Chloe who handed over every penny of her scholarship money, the Chloe who would cry with guilt whenever I got sick. But we were never from the same world. I remembered her promise again. "Ethan, I'll make sure you have a good life." She gave me a comfortable life, freeing me from hunger and cold, but she never spoke of love again. So, leaving her was the best option. The next day, I went to see Julian's father. Mr. Vance pushed an agreement in front of me. $100 million plus a job offer at a Wall Street law firm. Leave Chloe for my son. His every gesture radiated the quiet authority of a legal powerhouse. When I hesitated to sign, he frowned and sneered. "You sell fish for a living. Do you really think you're good enough for a Crawford?" I lowered my eyes, silent, the hand holding the pen trembling slightly. Mr. Vance pressed, "You're an orphan. Can you support her the way Julian can?" I shook my head slowly, and with a bitter laugh, I signed my name on the agreement. The black ink on the white paper laid out the terms clearly, severing the bond between Chloe and me completely. I walked out of the coffee shop and was about to call a car when a news alert about Chloe popped up on my phone. Already trending #1, billion-dollar project secured. Business magnate Chloe Crawford and legal prodigy Julian Vance join forces, stunning the business world. People online were flooding the comments with their blessings. The Ice Queen CEO and the rich heir, a beautiful love story. Now that's a perfect match. I gripped my phone tighter as my tears fell onto the words "perfect match." It was time for me to go. My phone suddenly rang. It was Chloe's playful voice on the other end. "Why weren't you picking up? We're having a company celebration tonight. I'd be really happy if you came." I was about to refuse, but Chloe, as if reading my mind, said, "I want you to be there." Her voice had a rare, pleading quality, just like when she was 19 and had just earned her first big paycheck. She wrapped her arms around my waist and said, "I wish you didn't have to work so hard." I quietly murmured my agreement. "So, can you come pick me up?" After a long pause, Chloe finally explained, "Sorry, I have to pick up Julian. He was the key to closing this deal after all." I shouldn't have expected anything, but my heart ached uncontrollably. I went home and changed into the nicest clothes I owned, but standing in the middle of the glittering ballroom, I still felt terribly awkward. Julian approached with his arm around Chloe's shoulders, looking dashing and distinguished in a black suit whose cut and fabric were infinitely superior to mine. I turned to flee, but a voice stopped me. "Ethan, I'm so glad you could make it," Julian said with a smirk. "Chloe mentioned you weren't comfortable in these settings. Good thing I insisted, or she wouldn't have invited you." I looked over at Chloe, my hands clenching in humiliation. Julian shook my hand like we were old friends and led me to the buffet. "I hear you work at the fish market. I had the chef prepare a few things I'd love for you to try." I stared at him and shook my head, mortified. I don't know how. Julian handed me a tin of caviar. I'll teach you. After all, you took care of Chloe for me. I've been wanting to thank you. I instinctively glanced at Chloe, but she just gave a slight nod of approval. As I tried to push it away, the caviar spilled all over my clothes. Chloe's brow furrowed. Julian gasped. Oh, I'm so sorry. Why don't I take Ethan to get a change of clothes? I tried to refuse, but I saw Chloe nod. Julian, thank you for taking care of it. With no other choice, I followed Julian toward the elevators. The instant the elevator doors slid shut, Julian let out a cold laugh. He looked down at me condescendingly. Chloe really thought you loved her. Turns out you're just a greedy fishmonger who'd sell her out for cash. I watched the floor number climbing, saying nothing. Julian shot me a suspicious look. You're not having second thoughts about leaving, are you? I looked at him and pressed my lips together. Don't worry, Suddenly, the elevator began to fall, the steel cables shaking violently. I was slammed against the wall as Julian's terrified scream echoed in my ears. Blood poured from my forehead, blurring my vision, and a pain so intense it felt like my organs were being twisted into knots shot through me. Just before I lost consciousness, I thought I heard Chloe's panicked voice. I instinctively reached out a hand. Chloe, save me. But after a rescuer assessed the situation, his expression was grim. Ms. Crawford, our resources are limited. We can only get one of them out at a time. We're running out of time. Who do you want us to save? That familiar voice, nearly breaking with strain, called out a name. She said it again. Julian. Save Julian first. Before my vision faded completely, a single, bloody tear slid from the corner of my eye. I shouldn't have been sad. Chloe had found someone she wanted to protect more than me, and now I could finally leave for good. When I woke up, a nurse changing my bandages spoke quickly. You have a mild concussion. Any later and you wouldn't have made it. Your sister is in the next room with Mr. Vance. Do you need me to get her for you? I froze, my cracked lips barely forming the word. Sister. The nurse nodded. Ms. Crawford said you were her brother. She told us to let her know the second you were awake. Chloe looked terrible when she came in. Chloe had seen the notification from the visa center on my phone. Her gaze was chilling. Where are you going? It took me a moment to process before I said hoarsely, it's probably a spam message. Someone like me isn't going abroad. My faint, self-deprecating tone seemed to smooth the worry from her brow. Chloe's eyes fell on my pale face, and she sighed. I'm sorry. I failed to protect you. I replied flatly, it's fine. Mr. Vance is the priority. Chloe lowered her gaze and was silent for a long moment before speaking. Julian has a long career ahead of him. I couldn't ruin his life, so I had to let you take the fall. You're used to hardship, but he's lived a privileged life. I couldn't. I wanted to argue, but a lump formed in my throat, and I clenched my fists so tightly my knuckles turned white. In the end, I just gave the slightest nod. All our time together, through thick and thin, felt like nothing more than my own delusion, completely worthless in her eyes. Julian has a clotting disorder, Chloe began, hesitating. He might need a transfusion at any moment. You and he are both Rh negative. Ethan, would you be willing to donate some blood for him? Just in case. The color drained from my face. Chloe took my icy hand in hers. The word no screamed inside my head, and a bitter acidity felt like a million ants eating away at my heart. The room was so quiet that time itself seemed to have stopped. I suddenly laughed. Of course, sis. Chloe froze, surprised I had agreed so readily, and even more shocked by what I had called her. She frowned, about to explain, when a nurse burst in. Ms. Crawford, Mr. Vance is down to his last bag of blood. Chloe shot to her feet. Ethan, please. She helped me up and rushed me to the phlebotomy lab. My veins were hard to find. The nurse had to probe with the needle several times before finding the right spot. By the time they had drawn 7 vials, my forearm was a patchwork of blue and purple. Just as the nurse was about to hand me a cotton ball, Chloe took it from her, crouched down, and gently pressed it against the puncture wound. She lowered her head and blew softly on the spot, the same gentle way she used to when I'd cut my finger on a fish scale, trying to soothe the sting. It felt like someone had squeezed my heart, a sharp, aching pang. She asked softly, "Does it hurt? I'll be gentler, okay?" My eyes burned, and I desperately wanted to throw my arms around her. Just then, a doctor ran up, out of breath. Ms. Crawford, it's an emergency. Mr. Vance was trying to find you and fell out of his bed in his haste. Chloe cried out, "What?" Her hand tightened reflexively, and the pain made me suck in a sharp breath. She bolted out the door and ran toward Julian's room. The cotton swab fell to the floor and broke in two, just like our relationship, now broken beyond repair. I checked out of the hospital by myself. I stumbled home, and when I pushed open the door to our house, the first thing I saw was Chloe feeding Julian his medicine. Seeing me, Julian immediately came over, a look of apology on his face. "Ethan, you're back. It's not what you think. The legal department called with an emergency, and Chloe and I were planning to come get you as soon as we finished." Julian stepped forward and took my hand, his voice full of remorse. "Besides, I have your blood in my veins. I haven't even had a chance to properly thank you." He squeezed my hand, his thumb pressing hard on the needle mark on my skin. A sharp pain shot up my arm. I winced and pulled my hand away. I hadn't used any force, yet Julian staggered backward dramatically. Chloe rushed forward and caught him, steadying him from behind. Her icy gaze landed on me. "Ethan, what are you doing now?" "Julian is still hurt." I looked at Chloe, my eyes filled with exhaustion. She didn't even wait for an explanation before siding with Julian. "Julian was hurt, yes, but I was the one who was more injured." My voice was quiet. "I'm sorry. It was my fault." The scolding words died in Chloe's throat. She opened her mouth to speak several times but said nothing. Julian shook his head, feigning generosity. "It's nothing. Why don't you join us at the hearing later, Ethan? I heard you never got to go to Georgetown," he said, his tone sincere, as if he was doing me a favor. "Think of this as a chance to live out that dream." I glanced at Chloe and saw her gazing at Julian, her eyes full of admiration and indulgence. I gave a self-mocking smile and agreed. I didn't want to cause any more trouble before I left. The courtroom was solemn, the atmosphere tense. Chloe and Julian sat side by side. His long fingers marked up the legal documents while she tilted her head, listening intently to his analysis. They were so close, they looked less like colleagues and more like lovers sharing secrets. He made a show of being thoughtful. "Chloe, should we let Ethan weigh in?" Chloe frowned. "No, he doesn't understand any of this. He'll only slow you down." Hearing that, Julian put on a show of disappointment, but from an angle she couldn't see, he shot me a look of pure contempt. I sat in the corner, clutching the legal brief so tightly it crumpled in my hand, the sharp edge of the paper cutting my finger. I was an embarrassment, unfit for such a stage. In her eyes, I was just a fishmonger who never even went to college. The days we spent struggling to survive were probably memories she hated most. I sat in the corner of the gallery, watching the approving looks Chloe gave him, watching them smile at each other. Then, the opposing counsel found a hole in Julian's argument. "Mr. Vance, you claim my client plagiarized Crawford Corp's core architecture, but the aggregation algorithm is an industry standard. How is that plagiarism?" Julian was speechless, his face turning red. "Well, it's..." My eyes flickered, and I shot a look at Chloe. That algorithm was her life's blood. She had developed it 5 years ago in our damp basement apartment, working it out again and again on scrap paper I'd bought with my earnings. And now, someone was trying to destroy all her hard work. I blurted out almost instinctively, "The core issue isn't the architecture. Their product copied Crawford's proprietary weight calculation logic and feedback mechanism exactly." The opposing lawyer was struck silent. Julian whipped his head around to stare at me in disbelief. "Mr. Reed, this is a formal hearing. Uninvolved parties are not to speak." Chloe frowned, and when she looked at me, her expression was one of weary resignation. Finally, she spoke. "We request a continuance." She took Julian by the hand and walked out of the courtroom. A pain shot through my chest as I quietly followed them. Just around the corner, I heard her voice as she stood on her tiptoes to kiss him. "How can a fishmonger from the market possibly compare to a brilliant legal mind like you?" Every word was like a shard of glass piercing my chest. I suddenly remembered the moment Chloe finally cracked that algorithm. She had hugged me so tightly. Under the flickering light bulb, she had stood on her toes and given me a gentle peck on the lips. It was my first kiss. Suddenly, a venomous voice came from behind me. "Ethan, who the hell do you think you are?" In the mirror, I saw Julian's face, twisted with rage. A pair of strong hands grabbed my arms. Before I could react, he landed a solid punch. Julian stared at me with a smirk, then suddenly burst out laughing. "Who do you think you are? Daring to humiliate me like that? I thought you knew your place. I guess I shouldn't be surprised that a pretty boy from the slums would get delusional ideas." I struggled with all my strength, prying his fingers off me one by one. "Mr. Vance, I won't go back on my promise." Before I could finish, Julian suddenly slammed his hand, adorned with a large, expensive jade ring, against the bathroom mirror, shattering it. Sharp fragments of glass showered down on me, and blood started to flow from a dozen small cuts. Seeing me covered in blood, Julian smiled cruelly. "This is what happens when you piss me off." Then, he picked up a shard of glass, made a shallow cut on his own forearm, and threw the bloody piece at me. As he let out a theatrical scream, Chloe burst in and rushed to his side. "What happened?" Julian put on a brave face. "It's nothing. It's my fault. I almost cost the company everything. Ethan has every right to be angry with me." Chloe's cold glare fixed on me. "Ethan, the company has nothing to do with you. Stay out of it." I frowned. "I didn't do anything. He's framing me." The anger in her eyes hardened. "Are you still trying to lie? He's a pampered heir from a wealthy family. Where would he get the strength to smash a mirror? Did you learn these kinds of dirty tricks living in that rough neighborhood of yours?" With that, she helped Julian up, shot me one last cold look, and left. I stood there, frozen, my eyes moving from the shallow scratch on Julian's arm to my own bleeding cuts. And then, I started to laugh. I remembered scraping my knee raw while delivering food in the rain to make extra money. Back then, it was Chloe's tears that fell on my wound. She had whispered a promise to me, "Ethan, I'm going to make it big, and you'll never have to suffer again." Well, Chloe had made it big, and I had suffered more than enough. This woman, who had always been so calm and composed, was now dragging me through the mud for Julian's sake, time and time again. Lying in the hospital bed, I stared blankly at the ceiling. So the girl who once swallowed her pride to shout and sell fish with me at the market would one day look at me with disgust. I buried my face in my pillow to hide the tears welling in my eyes. The door creaked open. Chloe placed a bouquet of jasmine on my bedside table and then pulled a small bag of warm, roasted chestnuts from her coat, pressing it into my hand. The steam rising from the bag blurred my vision. She broke the silence first. "They're from that place you like. See if they still taste the same." I didn't reply, just explained in a hoarse voice, "I didn't mean to interrupt at the hearing. I just couldn't stand by and watch all your hard work go down the drain. And I really didn't hurt Julian. If I'm going to leave, I want to leave with my name cleared." Chloe suddenly pulled me into a gentle hug. I know all of it." Then she added, "Just let Julian have this one." Her words were a death sentence. "His family is powerful. Even when he's wrong, no one dares to challenge him." She paused. "Ethan, just be reasonable." I froze, biting down on my lip until I tasted blood. How much more reasonable could I possibly be? Would she only be satisfied if I died? I whispered, "Chloe, did you bring roasted chestnuts for Julian too?" Chloe paused for a second, then slowly shook her head. "They're full of additives. Julian wouldn't eat them." The heat from the chestnuts was so intense it raised a blister on my finger, but I barely noticed. She peeled one and was about to offer it to me when she saw Julian standing in the doorway. "Ethan, I came to apologize," he said. "It was my poor preparation that caused trouble for the company." He opened a velvet box in his hands. Inside was a pair of dazzling multi-million-dollar diamond earrings. A small token of my apology. He stepped closer. "Let me help you put one on." I was about to refuse, a grown man wearing an earring, when Chloe's firm voice cut in. "Don't refuse Julian's kind gesture." The next second, a sharp pain pierced my earlobe as the silver post was forced through the skin, drawing a thin line of blood. Julian gasped. "Ethan, I had no idea your ears weren't pierced." I covered my ear, shaking my head calmly. "It's fine." Chloe's brow furrowed in concern and she started to move toward me, but I turned away. "Mr. Vance's cut has reopened," I said softly. Her attention instantly shifted, her eyes, filled with concern, fixed on the blood seeping from the cut on Julian's arm, and she immediately helped him up to get it rebandaged. I looked down at the blister on my hand and emotionlessly popped it with my thumbnail. On the day I was discharged, Chloe herself came to take me home. The car had just pulled up to the house when Julian called. "Chloe, don't forget the reunion later. Bring Ethan along, it'll be good for him to relax." Without a word to me, Chloe immediately turned the car around. Looks like Julian still has Chloe wrapped around his finger. One call and she comes running. I know, right? The it couple from college. It's about time they finally got together. Through the chorus of teasing, someone noticed me. "Who's this?" Julian slung an arm around my shoulders and introduced me with a smile. "This is Ethan. I've told you guys about him. He's Chloe's." He trailed off, a look of awkwardness on his face. After all, Chloe had never publicly acknowledged our relationship. My eyelids fluttered. "I'm a distant relative," I said quietly. "A relative?" one of his friends said, looking me up and down. Looks more like some poor cousin from the sticks looking for a handout. Chloe frowned. Julian quickly intervened. Hey, don't say that. Ethan sells fish at the market. He works harder than any of us. Someone waved a hand in front of their nose as if smelling something bad. I pretended not to notice and found a seat in the corner. Chloe was about to sit next to me when her phone rang. She whispered something to Julian, asking him to keep an eye on me, then excused herself. The moment the door closed, Julian's smile vanished. He glanced at me, then turned to his friends and started talking about the latest couture collections, completely ignoring me. Listening to them casually discuss brands that cost tens of thousands, I gripped the hem of my cheap shirt. Julian suddenly pointed at the logo on my chest. Ethan, is that Mio Mio you're wearing? I looked down, confused. You're seeing things, Julian. That's a knockoff. One of his friends laughed. The fishmonger wears fakes. They picked apart my clothes, and their malice felt like a rising tide, slowly suffocating me. Julian stepped in with a laugh, but his eyes were filled with scorn. Come on, guys. Ethan works a tough job. It's understandable he doesn't have a sense of style. I looked down, the calluses on my palms aching as I clenched my fists. In my peripheral vision, I saw Julian's smooth, slender hands, the hands of a man who had never known manual labor. They made me feel like a shabby clown. Just then, Chloe came back to the table. Soon, everyone was loudly demanding a game of truth or dare. When the bottle landed on Julian again, he gave a helpless laugh. I'll take a dare. Kiss a girl in this room for 3 minutes, a friend called out, drawing out the words. Through this piece of paper, of course, he added, holding up a sheet of paper. Julian's eyes shifted, and he took Chloe's hand, murmuring, Chloe, help me out. It's just a game. Ethan won't mind. He looked at me, right? I nodded curtly. Do whatever you want. But Chloe's eyes grew dark, and as if to spite me, she pulled Julian towards her and kissed him. Their fingers were interlaced as they kissed, long and deep. The flimsy sheet of paper fluttered to the floor, but it felt like it had torn a hole straight through my heart. I quietly went up to the rooftop for some air, only to be cornered by Julian's friends, all holding drinks. Ethan, you finally realized you're not wanted here? Stinking of fish, wearing knockoffs you can't afford, you're not worth Julian's little finger. And you think you have a chance with Chloe? They backed me into a corner. They sneered, forcing a glass to my lips. They held me down, forcing the burning liquid down my throat. My stomach felt like it was being ripped apart. I collapsed onto the floor, and then felt a sharp pain as a hand holding a small knife sliced across my back. The ringleader laughed mockingly. You're the fishmonger, right? The tip of the blade carved that word into my back. The smell of blood filled the air. I was shaking in agony. With trembling fingers, I managed to pull out my phone and dial 911. The sharp blade cut into me again, and a pool of my own blood began to spread on the floor beneath me. Humiliation and pain twisted together inside me until even my breath came in shuddering gasps. Just before I blacked out, I thought I saw the panic in Chloe's eyes. The lavage tube was slowly forced down my throat. The mixture of stomach acid and solution churned inside me. My whole body shook. Each flush of my stomach felt like being sliced apart by 1,000 knives. I woke again late in the night. I shifted slightly, and Chloe, who had been dozing by my bedside, immediately woke up. She had faint dark circles under her eyes, and the hand holding mine was trembling. I'm sorry, she said. I never thought they'd go that far. I looked at her red-rimmed eyes and could only picture her flushed lips as she kissed Julian. I slowly closed my eyes, too weak to speak. I just raised a hand and pointed toward the door, telling her to leave. Chloe was silent for a long time before she pulled out a document. This is a legal release for Julian's friends. I need you to sign it. I stared at her for a few seconds, my voice raspy. A release. Her eyes were unreadable. You shouldn't have called the police so rashly. They've suffered enough, and besides, they're friends of mine and Julian's. Just let it go. My voice was shaking. So I deserved everything that happened to me? Chloe frowned slightly, as if she had anticipated this reaction. She nodded to her assistant, and bodyguards from outside the door brought in a large safe, which they opened to reveal stacks and stacks of cash. Even if every word on that document costs a fortune, this should be enough to cover it. I bit down hard on my lip, the metallic taste of blood filling my mouth. When I said nothing, she gestured again, and more cases were brought in. 1, 2, then 3 until they filled the entire room. Chloe's cold voice came from above me, every word grinding my self-respect into dust. A mansion downtown. The deed will be in your name. My eyes stung as I remembered us huddled under a single blanket in that tiny, cramped apartment. She continued, "A Porsche 911. Here are the keys." I clenched my fists, remembering riding through the park with her on the back of my bicycle. "Any job you want at Crawford Corp," she said. I bit my lip until it bled, remembering how she'd worked 3 jobs a day just to buy me a pair of knee pads. My voice was a raw, broken whisper. "I'll sign. Chloe, this is the last time. The very last time I do anything for you." She opened her mouth, but said nothing, as if she couldn't see the grief in my eyes. Her silence was the final punctuation mark on our 8-year relationship. The Chloe who used to clumsily knit scarves for me, who would wait for me in the freezing cold until her ears were bright red, was a world away from the woman standing before me now. I was a burden, a liability, but I was never her partner, never the one she relied on. After that day, Mr. Vance came to see me one time. "Ethan, here are your travel documents and visa paperwork." His expression was dark as he tossed a manila envelope onto my bed. Was this whole scene just a way to make trouble for Julian? I shook my head calmly. "I've already signed the release. I won't cause any more trouble for your son." I paused. "Don't worry. I'll be out of your son's way soon enough." Mr. Vance snorted. "At least you know your place." After he left, tears spilled from my eyes without warning, staining the manila envelope. The spots quickly faded, just like the relationship between Chloe and me, as if it had never been worth mentioning at all. So even if I left, Chloe wouldn't care. I had witnessed her at her lowest, her most vulnerable, and those were likely the memories she was most desperate to erase. A news alert popped up on my phone. Crawford Corp was redeveloping the old neighborhood. The basement apartment we had lived in was about to be demolished. The hand at my side tightened into a fist, trembling. I took off the matching keychain she had given me and threw it in the trash. Then I went to the front door and erased my fingerprints and facial scan from the security system. For 8 years, I had protected a girl with the purest form of love. But today, I used the last of my strength to drag my suitcase away, determined to finally live for myself. At the auction, priceless treasures were met with gasps of awe from the crowd, but Chloe's mind kept wandering. An antique vase reminded her of the plastic bottle I used to grow flowers. A glass bracelet reminded her of the simple jasmine chain I'd once tied around her wrist. Every item up for bid seemed to conjure a memory of our time together. "Chloe, what's wrong?" Julian waved a hand in front of her face. "I called your name a few times, but you didn't answer." Her focus snapped back, and she forced a smile. "It's nothing. See anything you like? I'll buy it for you." At that, Julian forgot her odd behavior and happily agreed. Chloe collected herself, but her pupils contracted when the next item was presented. It was a white jade pendant, the only thing I had with me when I was found as a baby at the orphanage. But that year, after someone had taunted her, calling her the Crawford family curse for causing her parents' deaths, she had beaten them so badly that I had to pawn the pendant to pay their medical bills. Chloe didn't hesitate. She signaled an all-in bid, guaranteeing she would win it. Julian looked at her, his face lighting up. "Chloe, is that for me?" She clutched the cool jade in her hand. "No, it's for Ethan." The jade had a tiny, almost invisible crack, which suddenly reminded her of the dead, empty look in my eyes before I left. A sense of panic seized her. She turned to Julian. "I'm sorry, I can't do dinner tonight." With that, she stood and walked away, leaving a bewildered Julian in her wake. He frowned, annoyed. No one had ever dared to treat him like that. It was only after confirming with his father that I was really gone that he finally relaxed. As long as Chloe wasn't a complete idiot, she had to know he was the right choice. An unseen force seemed to pull Chloe back to the house. For the first time, the need to see me was overwhelming. But when she pushed open the door, the house was dark and silent. Her heart sank. I hadn't left a light on for her. She flipped the light switch and was momentarily blinded. The brilliant crystal chandelier was a world away from the single, dim bulb in our old apartment. She lowered her hand and looked around, but she couldn't see me anywhere. "Is Ethan already asleep?" she wondered. After we moved into the mansion, I stopped going to the fish market. I would spend my days just waiting for her to come home, looking forward to the simple act of talking with her. But with so many rivals circling her company, the stress got to her. One day, she snapped at me for the first time. "I'm exhausted. Can you just leave me alone for a minute?" We both froze after she said it. She was the one in the wrong, but I was the one who ended up apologizing. I was always the one making excuses for her. A flicker of guilt crossed Chloe's eyes. She suddenly had the urge to hold me. She gently pushed open my bedroom door. Everything looked normal except I wasn't there. Her heart seized, and panic began to set in. She turned and scanned the room again. It wasn't just me that was missing. My clothes, my toiletries, nearly everything I owned had vanished. The white sheets were perfectly smooth, without a single wrinkle, as if I had never existed at all, as if I were just a figment of her imagination. The realization hit her. Her breath caught in her throat, and the color drained from her face as she stood by the bed. Then she saw it, the keychain in the trash. The matching keychain she'd bought for us. It had cost less than $1, but I loved it. I took it everywhere, and now it lay there discarded like a piece of trash. Ethan's gone. This has to be a joke. We spent 8 years together through everything. We were closer than lovers. How could he just leave without a word? Chloe tried to reassure herself, but after turning the entire mansion upside down, she found no evidence that this was just some cruel joke. She sat on the sofa in a daze until her phone rang. Seeing it was Mr. Vance, Chloe frowned. If he was calling to complain on Julian's behalf, she wasn't in the mood. "Chloe, I need you to come to my office." Mr. Vance paused, then his voice grew serious. "I have a lead on what really happened to your parents." Inside her Maybach, Chloe floored the accelerator, her knuckles white as she gripped the steering wheel. Her entire reason for getting close to Julian had been to get his father to help her uncover the truth about her parents' deaths. She had seen all the pain I'd endured, but she hadn't wanted to drag me into her dangerous world. The conspiracy was a treacherous undercurrent, and she wanted to wait until it was all over so I could live a peaceful, worry-free life. Vance Associates Law. "Chloe, your parents' plane crash wasn't an accident," Mr. Vance said, handing her a folder. "Someone remotely hacked the flight control system." Chloe stared at the papers, her eyes turning red. She had been right. It was all premeditated. Otherwise, how could her family's company have been torn apart and devoured so quickly after the funeral? "I'll keep looking into the matter for you." Mr. Vance pushed his glasses up his nose, remembering his son's complaints on the phone. "And you promised me you would treat Julian well. Have you kept that promise?" His voice hardened. "I hear you abandoned him at the auction for that Ethan Reed. Is that fishmonger so important that you'd abandon your parents' memory for him?" When the Crawford family collapsed, he had assumed Chloe would be crushed. He never expected her to have the resilience to climb back to the top of the business world so quickly. A woman like that was just barely a suitable match for his son. Besides, he knew exactly what had happened to her parents. Since Chloe needed him, it was only natural for him to leverage the situation for maximum gain. The veiled threat in his voice made Chloe's hands tighten into fists. If he hadn't been the only lawyer willing to touch her family's case all those years ago, she wouldn't have put up with this for so long. Seeing Chloe's silent, downcast eyes, Mr. Vance sneered inwardly. It seemed he was right. Her feelings for Ethan Reed ran deep. But what did that matter? His power was more than enough to sweep away any obstacle for his son. If anyone was to blame, it was Ethan Reed himself, for getting in Julian's way and for not being born into the right family. Mr. Vance toyed with a gold fountain pen. "Ethan Reed left," he said casually. "Yesterday." The words hit Chloe, and her composure instantly crumbled. Her voice trembled. "No, that's not possible. How would you know? Was it you? Did you drive him away?" Seeing her panicked state, Mr. Vance snorted. "He wanted to go. I just helped him on his way." Her knuckles turned white as she gripped the edge of the desk, her eyes bloodshot. "Impossible. He wouldn't." Mr. Vance was taken aback by the chilling look in her eyes. He frowned, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. "I gave him money and a new life. Since he took it, it's obvious how much Chloe really meant to him. Was a man that easily bought off really worth her deluding herself over?" With that thought, he cleared his throat and said so aloud. Chloe's expression froze, as if she'd been turned to stone. Her temples began to throb, and a ringing filled her ears. She slammed her fist against the wall, not even noticing when her knuckles started to bleed, and hissed through clenched teeth, "You're lying. You forced him out." Mr. Vance's brow furrowed. He had no desire to explain himself further. He clapped his hands, and his men brought in several large cases. "He asked me to return these to you when I saw him at the hospital. Now do you believe me?" Her eyes fell on the familiar safes. All the things she had given me as compensation, I hadn't taken a single one. The color drained completely from her face. Then she heard Mr. Vance continue, "Being in love with a fishmonger must be a stain on your reputation. Stay with Julian, and I can overlook it." Chloe's voice was raspy. "Ethan is my family. That won't interfere with my relationship with Julian." Mr. Vance scoffed. "Family? Anyone with eyes can see how you feel about him. I heard you're planning to demolish the neighborhood where you used to live. Aren't you just trying to erase the memory of that time, to forget the powerless girl who was at everyone's mercy? The mention of that apartment was like a psychic blow. Chloe's pupils shrank. She didn't remember running out of the law firm, only driving as fast as she could to get there. But as she arrived, the roar of a bulldozer filled the air, and the basement apartment we had shared was reduced to rubble in an instant. Staring at the rubble, Chloe felt her own world collapse. As she stood there in a stupor, someone tapped her on the shoulder. She turned slowly. It was her old landlord. "Chloe, long time no see," the landlord said warmly. "Ethan came by yesterday with his suitcase. I thought you two were finally going on your honeymoon." The landlord added wistfully, "You two finally made it. He stuck by you through all those hard years. You'd better treat him right." The landlord went on, recounting those difficult years. Chloe stared blankly at the ground, her eyes vacant, until a single tear escaped and rolled down her cheek, snapping her back to reality. She managed a weak smile and said her goodbyes. Back in her car, her hands shaking, she called me 100 times and sent 1,000 messages. Every call went to voicemail, every message was left undelivered. I had blocked her. Through the car window, amidst the dusty rubble, she imagined she could see me, young and smiling, walking towards her, boasting about a good day's sales. "Chloe, I got a few big customers today. Weren't you talking about wanting to study abroad?" She slowly curled her fingers into a fist, whispering my name again and again, but no one answered. She slammed her fist on the steering wheel, and the blare of the horn cruelly yanked her back to the present. Chloe could no longer lie to herself. I had really left her. Empty wine bottles lay scattered on the carpet. Outside, the incessant rain seemed to magnify her despair. No one would have guessed that this famously cold and composed business magnate would allow herself to collapse on a sofa, disheveled and broken, the slight puffiness of her eyes the only evidence of her night of drinking. It was the first time she had ever missed a board meeting. Ever since she started her company, she had worked day and night, driven by a single purpose: revenge. Now, with me gone, the thread that had held her together had finally snapped. Without me by her side, did any of it even matter? She felt lost and confused. She pressed her right hand hard against her chest, so hard her fingertips turned white. Ever since I came to live with her, the question Chloe heard most often was, "Who is he?" To the nurses, I was her brother. To her classmates, a distant cousin. To her, I was the one who had saved her life. I had so many titles, but lover was never one of them. "Chloe, do you love me?" I had asked her on her birthday, a little drunk, my head buried in her neck. She had opened her mouth, but no words came out. Out of fear, out of a pathetic sense of pride, she had lied to herself, convinced it was gratitude, not love. Her lips parted, and she whispered the words that were 8 years too late. "I do. I love you so much." But now that she finally understood her own heart, I was no longer there to hear it. The room was so quiet that her single, choked sob echoed clearly. When Julian found her, she was swirling a glass of red wine, trying to drown her sorrows in alcohol. "Chloe, why weren't you at the office today?" He took the glass from her hand, his tone chiding, but his eyes filled with genuine concern. He had searched the entire house for her, but never thought to look in my room. Julian truly couldn't understand it. In terms of family, I wasn't fit to shine his shoes. In terms of education, I was a dropout who'd never even finished college. Other than a handsome face, what did I have that could possibly compare to him? Why was Chloe so completely captivated by me? Even after all his efforts to slander my name, a part of her heart still belonged to me. Chloe stared at her empty hand and frowned. She was about to speak when a sharp, cramping pain shot through her stomach, and a cold sweat broke out on her forehead. Julian gently gathered her into his arms. "Don't you see it yet, Chloe?" he said softly. "Ethan took the money and ran. He never cared about you. I won't let you destroy yourself for him." As his warm tears fell on the back of her cool hand, the pain of my abandonment washed over her. Almost instinctively, she collapsed into his arms. The sudden intimacy of the moment surprised him. "Chloe, what does this mean?" Chloe stared for a moment. In her alcohol-fueled haze, Julian's face seemed to blur, and for a second, she saw mine instead. She spoke slowly, deliberately. "Will you marry me?" The moment the words were out, Chloe regretted them. She knew it was more out of spite than anything else. She just refused to believe that she couldn't live without me. If I could leave without a second thought, then she could move on just as easily. She was about to tell him she was drunk and didn't mean it, but he nodded eagerly, as if afraid she'd change her mind. "I do. Of course, I'll marry you. Chloe opened her mouth, but no words came out. Wasn't this for the best? She and Julian were a perfect match on paper. His family could help her uncover the truth about her parents, and they could support her company. Marriage was nothing more than a transaction, a tool for mutual benefit. That was what she had been taught since she was a child. A marriage to Julian would be one of mutual respect, calm and uneventful. But if she married me, even a difficult marriage would be filled with a sense of hope. Chloe was only just now realizing that in the 8 years since her fall from grace, I had become an irreplaceable part of her life. The first thing Julian did when he got home was share the good news with his father. Mr. Vance raised an eyebrow and nodded in satisfaction. So she finally came to her senses. He looked at his son's overjoyed face and frowned. The wedding can wait, but we need to schedule the engagement party immediately. It was the perfect opportunity to leverage the Crawford name to expand their network, and it would secure his son's position. And so, he quickly set a date for the engagement. Everything was moving so fast that Chloe still felt like she was in a dream as she and Julian looked at wedding dresses. Looking at the tailored suits in the display window, she smiled to herself, imagining me in one of them. If I were to wear that suit at our wedding, she thought, I would be the most handsome groom she had ever seen. The swoosh of the dressing room curtain being pulled back snapped her out of her daydream. Julian stood before her in a suit, doing a slow turn. Chloe, how do I look? Handsome, right? She suddenly went quiet. Mistaking her silence for awe, Julian grew bold and pulled her in for a kiss. But she pushed him away, her voice trembling slightly. That one's fine. I'll pay. Julian caught the flicker of sadness in her eyes and was about to ask what was wrong when she pulled him into a quick, tight hug. Come on, I'll take you home. After signing the check, Chloe walked out of the shop without a backward glance, as if she were fleeing from something. She didn't say a word the entire drive. Julian, unsure of what he had done wrong, tried to fill the silence with small talk. When the car stopped in front of the Vance estate, his incessant chattering was still ringing in her ears. Chloe frowned, then suddenly pulled him in by the neck and kissed him. The world fell silent. After the kiss, Julian got out of the car with a smug smile. Chloe was already halfway home when she noticed he had left his phone in the car. She rubbed her weary temples, and with a sigh, turned the car around and headed back. On Mr. Vance's orders, the household staff had long been treating Chloe as the future lady of the house. So no one stopped her as she walked in. The butler graciously led her to the study. Ms. Crawford, Mr. Vance and Julian are inside. Chloe nodded, planning to wait outside, but then she heard arguing from within the room. Dad, what are you talking about? Chloe and I are in love. Mr. Vance snorted. She's still in love with that fishmonger. What do you think will happen if she finds out what you did to Ethan Reed? Do you think she'll just forgive you? You had your friends force-feed him alcohol. Did you really think you could get away with that without a trace? And all those rumors about him, Mr. Vance continued, his voice filled with disappointment. Weren't they all started by those degenerate friends of yours? Julian scoffed. So what? A social climber like him deserved it. My only regret is that I didn't smash his pretty face with that piece of glass. Chloe's breath caught in her throat. Mr. Vance sighed. Look, Ethan Reed is no longer a threat to you. Even if you had killed him, I could have made it go away. He glanced around, then lowered his voice. What's important is that you don't actually have to be genuine with Chloe. The purpose of this marriage is to slowly integrate our family's influence into her company. Julian looked confused. But shouldn't a husband and wife be open with each other? What's hers will be mine. Why all the secrecy? Mr. Vance's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. Do you remember the investigation she hired me for? Her parents died because the Walker family sabotaged their private jet. The words struck Chloe like a bolt of lightning. Julian's eyes widened. You knew the truth this whole time? Then why didn't you tell? Because I also had a hand in the Crawford family's downfall, his father said calmly, as if discussing the weather. The only reason I was brave enough to take their case was because the Walkers had my back. Julian covered his mouth in shock, struggling to maintain his composure. Then why did you approve of me and Chloe? Mr. Vance shot him a look. Who could have predicted that Chloe Crawford would be able to make such a comeback? And with the Walker family's influence waning over the years, I can't afford to bet on only one horse. Since she needs something from me, I'll just lead her along. You need to have a child with her as soon as possible, Mr. Vance instructed. The Crawford family legacy is vast. Do you really think our family won't get a piece of it? After a long silence, Julian whispered, Okay. That single, whispered word was the final straw. The truth she had searched for so desperately had become a cruel joke. She reached out beside her, an old habit from when she was at her most helpless, and would reach for my hand. But this time her hand found only empty air. The sound of a vase shattering was followed by Mr. Vance's sharp voice. "Who's there?" Chloe closed her eyes, turned, and walked back downstairs. She gave the phone to the butler, told him to say she had never been inside, and left. In the darkened mansion, Chloe leaned against a window. She was still reeling from what she had overheard. The Walker and Vance families had conspired to ruin her family, and she had gone to one of the perpetrators for help, almost marrying his son. Her Ethan had never done anything wrong. It was Julian who had systematically destroyed him, piling lie upon lie, until he had nowhere left to turn. A coldness spread through her fingers, and her eyes filled with tears. I had loved her, and she had made me compromise again and again until I finally left. The Vances had destroyed her, yet she had saved all her favoritism and protection for Julian. Chloe sat in silence for a long time. Finally, she could no longer deny her own heart. Lover, husband, it didn't matter. I was the only one she had ever wanted to marry. As for the scum who had destroyed her family 8 years ago, she would deal with them, and then she would be with me, free from all burdens. Chloe composed herself, then dialed Mr. Vance's number. Her voice was as calm as ever. "Mr. Vance, I'd like to move the engagement party to an earlier date." The Crawford Vance engagement party was a spectacle of breathtaking extravagance. A crystal champagne tower sparkled under the lights, the red carpet was the color of pigeon's blood, and crystal vases overflowed with blooming jasmine. The fairy tale engagement party captured the attention of the entire city's high society, all focused on the union of these two powerful families. Everyone assumed Chloe was madly in love with Julian. No one knew that every detail of the party she had planned herself was a reflection of a dream I once had. Chloe stood on the rooftop terrace, watching the guests below, her face devoid of any bridal joy. She would make it up to me. She would give me a wedding that was even grander, even more heartfelt. But first, she had to make the people who had hurt us pay a terrible price. "Ms. Crawford, we found the black box from your parents' plane," her assistant said, handing her a recording device. "And here is the other evidence you requested." The recording was choppy, perhaps due to turbulence, but through the static, Chloe could hear the sheer panic in her parents' voices. "We've lost control of the plane. It's the Walkers. Damn it, all systems are failing. What will happen to Chloe? She's only just become an adult. How can she?" The recording cut off abruptly with the sound of the impact, leaving only a chilling silence, and the echo of her parents' last words. "Chloe, we love you. You have to live a good life." The recorder slipped from her fingers and clattered to the floor. Chloe swayed on her feet, like a hollowed-out shell of a person. The Walkers and the Vances. They had destroyed the life she was supposed to have. Meanwhile, in the main hall, Julian, dressed in a white suit, made his entrance beside his father to a chorus of admiration. "Is that him? The top lawyer in the city?" a guest whispered. "He's even more handsome in person. He and Ms. Crawford make a perfect couple." "I'm so jealous," someone else agreed. "And he's her chief legal officer. A true power couple. She's a lucky woman." The slight smirk on Julian's face and the smug set of his shoulders betrayed his inner delight. Mr. Vance's eyes narrowed with satisfaction. He cleared his throat, feigning indifference. It seemed his gamble had paid off. Using the Crawford family as a stepping stone, the Vances were poised to climb even higher in the city's political and business circles. A collective gasp went through the crowd as all eyes turned to a tall, elegant figure. "Look, it's Miss Crawford." Chloe radiated an aura of cold, noble grace. The 8 years of hardship hadn't broken her spirit. Instead, they had forged in her the decisive ruthlessness of a true leader. Julian stepped forward to take her hand. "Chloe, I've been waiting for you." But Chloe crossed her arms over her chest and took a small step back, avoiding his touch. Julian's smile froze, his hand left hanging awkwardly in the air. Her cool gaze swept over the crowd. "Thank you all for coming to this engagement party. I'm afraid, however, that it will not be proceeding." Julian whipped his head around to stare at her. Her lips parted, her eyes cold as ice. "Because the Vance and Walker families are the ones who murdered my parents." The room fell so silent you could have heard a pin drop. Julian stood frozen, the color draining from his face. "Chloe, what are you saying?" She gave a cold smile and pressed play. The large screen behind her went black, and the crackling audio from the black box filled the room, her parents' terrified voices clear for everyone to hear. The truth, buried for 8 years, was finally out. and the room erupted in shocked murmurs. Someone whispered, "I heard the Walkers and the Crawfords were cousins. You really can't trust anyone to do something so despicable to your own family." Julian was panicking, but his father remained unervingly calm. "You think you can convict us with one unsubstantiated recording? Who's to say you didn't fake it?" Chloe laughed coldly. "Don't worry, I'm not finished." The screen then played a recording of the conversation between Julian and his father in the study, followed by my official medical report detailing my injuries. A scrolling list of all the illicit, borderline legal dealings between the Vance and Walker families appeared on the screen. And finally, security footage of Julian deliberately smashing the mirror and attacking me. The room exploded into chaos. The romantic atmosphere was shattered. Julian's eyes widened in terror. He looked around for an escape route, only to find himself surrounded by security guards. The master of ceremonies handed Chloe a microphone, and she proceeded to detail exactly how Mr. Vance had used legal loopholes to systematically dismantle and absorb her family's assets. The engagement party was the event of the season, and it was being live-streamed. She walked slowly toward the cameras, her face a mask of pain. "The only man I will ever call my husband," she said, her voice clear and strong, "is Ethan Reed." Mr. Vance's face turned a shade of purple. He covered his face with his sleeve, trying to shield himself from the flashing cameras. "Get out, all of you, stop taking pictures." Julian, still delusional, tried to plead with her, but she shoved him away. His face was a mask of disbelief. "Chloe, you promised you would never let me get hurt. Your parents are dead. Was it really necessary to drag all of us down with you, just for some nobody like Ethan?" Hearing his shameless words, Chloe's hands clenched into fists. "How dare you?" She lunged at him, her hands closing around his throat. "It was you and your father who destroyed my life, who tore me and Ethan apart. If it weren't for Ethan, I would have died in that cold, miserable apartment 8 years ago." Purple bruises were already forming on his neck. Just before he passed out, she released her grip in disgust, letting him slump to the floor. Killing a man like him would only dirty her hands. Seeing the mountain of evidence against him, Mr. Vance dropped to his knees, begging and crying. "Chloe, my dear, I was temporarily blinded by greed. The Walkers forced me into it. I had no choice." Hearing him throw them under the bus, the patriarch of the Walker family slapped him across the face, and the two men began to scuffle. "You old fool, you were the one who was blinded by greed. I'll kill you." Chloe watched the farcical scene unfold, her eyes filled with a deep sadness. 8 years ago, they had taken her parents and her family from her. 8 years later, they had taken me from her, too. "Chloe Crawford, you are an absolute fool." Police officers swarmed into the hall and began handcuffing them. "Ms. Crawford has provided us with a complete set of evidence. Please come with us." Julian, still dazed from the pain, was so terrified by the police that he lost control of his bladder. With 2 of his teeth knocked out, he scrambled on his knees toward Chloe, sobbing and begging. "Chloe, please, let me go. I won't ever get between you and Ethan again. Please, forgive me. I'm begging you. I don't want to go to prison." She narrowed her eyes at him. "You want a lighter sentence? Ethan already forgave your friends. What right do I have to forgive you on his behalf now? You and your father can rot in prison together. You can spend the rest of your lives repenting to my parents and to Ethan." Julian collapsed into a heap on the floor, all the fight gone out of him. But as the police were leading him away, he suddenly began to laugh hysterically. "Chloe Crawford, the person Ethan should hate most is you. I hope you spend the rest of your life, and every life after, begging for a forgiveness you will never receive." The farce was over. The guests had all gone. Chloe stood alone in the empty ballroom, her eyes filled with an infinite weariness. An endless tide of regret kept her from sleeping. She covered her face with her hands and whispered again and again, "I would rather have you hate me than this nothingness." She wanted to atone for her sins, but she didn't even have the chance. My reunion with Chloe was, fittingly, dramatic. I spent 3 years working my way up at a Wall Street law firm. Shortly after I made senior associate, my boss handed me a new case file. "Ethan, given your familiarity with U.S. corporate law, I want you to take this case. It's our first major international merger. If you can land this, a partnership and a hefty raise are practically guaranteed." I took the thick file, but I felt none of the usual excitement of a new challenge, only a strange sense of hesitation. I was still relatively junior, and beneath my crisp suit, my heart pounded with anxiety. I knew it was a fantastic opportunity, but for some reason, I had an instinctive aversion to the case. When I first arrived in New York, I knew no one. I studied for and passed the bar on my own, started by making coffee at a small firm, and worked my way up to handling my own cases. I had endured more than just the changing of seasons. I had pushed through countless sleepless nights of studying. It wasn't until I won my first case that I finally started to regain the self-confidence I had lost so long ago. I realized with a painful clarity how foolish I had been to tear up my Georgetown acceptance letter for Chloe. Since then, I've treated every opportunity as if it were life or death. Yet today, I had almost rejected this one. Shaking off the feeling, I decided to see what was causing my apprehension and untied the string on the envelope. When the name Crawford Corp jumped out at me from the page, my heart gave a painful lurch, even though a part of me had been expecting it. Our client is Crawford Corp? My boss looked up at me and nodded. That's right, the one and only legendary Crawford Corporation, which is all the more reason for you to seize this opportunity. He must have seen the apprehension in my eyes because he patted my shoulder reassuringly. Don't worry, I know Ms. Crawford has a reputation for being ruthless, but I've also heard she's never stopped looking for her first love. A woman that devoted can't be all that difficult to work with. Hearing Chloe's name again felt surreal, like a voice from another life. The news about her disastrous engagement party had made headlines even in New York. When I heard her declare that I was the only man she would ever marry, I couldn't deny the flicker of emotion I felt. But in this foreign country, I had been alone. Alone when I was sick, alone for every meal, alone when the stomach cramps got so bad I could barely move. I understood then that Chloe was destined to be nothing more than a youthful regret. I lowered my head, about to speak, but then I stopped myself. All right, I said instead. I'll take the case. This was business. There was no need to bring personal feelings into it. Besides, I owed Chloe nothing. I had no reason to be intimidated by her. On the flight back, I didn't sleep a wink. I watched the sky outside my window shift from starry black to the pale gray of dawn, and for the 9th time, I opened the case file and tried to focus. In the conference room, Chloe was already waiting. Insomnia had become her constant companion since I'd left, but today she had risen even earlier than usual. The weariness in her deep-set eyes was the clear result of countless nights spent numbing herself with work. But the moment I stepped into the room, her gaze faltered. She even rubbed her eyes, as if she thought she were hallucinating. Not until I offered a practiced, professional smile and extended my hand. Ms. Crawford, a pleasure to meet you. She stared for a few seconds before taking my hand. Ethan, you? I pulled my hand back firmly, not meeting her gaze. Let's get right to business, shall we? I don't want to waste your time. Case analysis, antitrust reviews, closing conditions. I spoke with an easy confidence, rattling off the professional terminology. Watching the confident, polished man I had become, Chloe felt a bitter pang in her chest. Her eyes began to burn, and she lowered her head, afraid I would see the love and regret she couldn't hide. In the 3 years since I'd been gone, Chloe had imagined our reunion tens of thousands of times. She longed to throw her arms around me and demand to know why I had left without a word. But now that I was actually here, she couldn't even bring herself to look at me, because she knew she had no right. I had stood by her side for 8 years, with no title, no recognition, from the depths of her poverty to the pinnacle of her success. And what had she done? She had flirted with Julian, stood by and let him humiliate me time and time again. She hated herself for wasting 8 years of my life, but she couldn't let me go, because I had become an inextricable part of her. Her assistant's quiet voice broke the silence. Ms. Crawford? Mr. Reed has concluded his presentation. Do you have anything to add? I glanced over at her, and my eyes met her intense gaze. I held her gaze, my tone strictly professional. If you're not satisfied, Ms. Crawford, we have alternative proposals. The formal address sent a sharp pain through Chloe's chest. After a long silence, just when I was sure the deal was dead, she shook her head. I have no objections. Whatever Mr. Reed requires, Crawford Corp will provide its full cooperation. Her team let out a collective sigh of relief and began to praise my professionalism. After all, Ms. Crawford had been notoriously volatile these past few years, and there weren't many people who escaped a meeting with her unscathed. The praise from the others brought a small, pleased smile to my face. I had expected Chloe to make things difficult, but the meeting had gone smoothly. I hadn't let my boss down. I gathered my papers and was being escorted out when a security guard at the main entrance stopped me. Mr. Reed, please wait. Confused, I frowned and was about to ask why when a voice came from behind me. Ethan, don't go. The familiar voice made me freeze. I turned around slowly. Chloe was standing behind me, her eyes following my every move, a mixture of caution and the sheer joy of rediscovery. I closed my eyes, the hand at my side clenching into a fist. The moment I took this case, I knew a confrontation with Chloe was inevitable. An awkward silence descended, wrapping around us like a thick cocoon. Crawford Corp employees hurried past, but many of them paused to stare when they saw their CEO. After all, their boss was famously immune to the charms of men, and they were all curious to see who this man was that had captured her attention. I felt their curious, gossiping eyes on me, and I felt like I was on pins and needles. "It's the middle of the workday," I said, sighing in frustration. "Let's go talk somewhere else." Chloe's eyes lit up, and she nodded eagerly. As long as I was willing to talk to her, there was still a chance. She didn't even realize that it was only with me that she ever let her childish side show. When we got to the parking garage, I kept trying to create distance between us, unsettled by the intensity of her stare. But before I could react, she had me pinned against the wall, her arms wrapped tightly around my waist. She inhaled deeply, greedily taking in my familiar scent, the faint hint of jasmine that had always soothed her. She stared at me, her cool hand forcing its way between my fingers, lacing them together. She couldn't hold back any longer. She wanted to hold me, to hug me, to kiss me. I struggled but couldn't break free. Annoyed, I gave her a hard shove. My voice was sharp. "Let go of me." I said we should go to a coffee shop. "If you want to do this here, I'm leaving." She rested her head on my shoulder, her voice tight with emotion. "Ethan, I've missed you so much. Please don't push me away. I'm begging you." Every second of the past 3 years had been an eternity for her. We were so close I could hear her heart hammering against her ribs. My voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "But I haven't missed you at all. Chloe, you're not that important to me. There's no need for this to be so unpleasant. It's all in the past." Her breathing grew ragged. She buried her face in my shoulder and shook her head, her voice wounded. "Ethan, you never used to treat me like this." Perhaps knowing she was in the wrong, she changed the subject, her grip still tight. "When you left 3 years ago, was it because I broke your heart?" She didn't seem to need an answer, just continued speaking. "But I had my reasons. I had the entire Crawford legacy on my shoulders. I could never forget how people sneered at me after my parents died." She suddenly laughed, a wild, hateful sound. I stared at her, alarmed and confused. "Ethan, all those people who hurt us," she said, her eyes glinting with a strange light. "They're all gone now. They'll never hurt us again." I had Julian committed to a psychiatric hospital. Electroshock therapy, chemical restraints, solitary confinement. "Everything he did to you, I did to him." I bit down hard on my lip. She smiled a dazed, almost delirious smile. "Ethan, what if I give you everything? All of Crawford Corp, it's all yours. Without you, what's the point of any of it?" My voice was cold. "The only thing I want from you is for you to stay away from me." I was terrified that one wrong move would land me in the same position as Julian. Her mood shifted in an instant. "But I can't," she cried. Suddenly, her arms were around my neck, and she was kissing me. It was a deep, bruising, desperate kiss, as if she were trying to pour 3 years of longing into that single moment. I struggled, then bit down hard on her lip. The metallic taste of blood filled my mouth. She must have sensed my desperation, because she pulled back, her hands trembling. "I'm sorry, Ethan. I just can't bear to be without you any longer. I really do love you, Ethan." I said coolly, "Chloe, stop with the act. In the 8 years we spent together, you never once told me you loved me. This isn't love. It's just you, unable to accept that I'm gone." Her eyes were bloodshot, filled with a bottomless grief. "No, when I was with you, I was only ever happy." There was no resentment. As if to prove her point, she began to unbutton her blouse with trembling fingers. I stared, and for the first time, I noticed that her pale hands were covered in small, faint scars, like old burns. "After you left, there was no one to iron my shirts for me," she said with a bitter smile. "I'm clumsy. I always burn myself." As she spoke, she pulled aside the fabric of her blouse. My pupils dilated. There, tattooed directly over her heart, was my name. I looked up at her, speechless. Seeing the emotion in my eyes fade back into cold indifference, Chloe's heart began to sink. Her voice trembled. "The word Julian's friends carved into your back. I've never forgotten it for a single moment. Ethan, this is my penance." It was a gesture of profound love. Looking into her sincere eyes, I was transported back in time, to the girl who had promised me, "Ethan, I will make sure you have a good life." But promises are cheap, and fate can be cruel. My love for her had died a slow death, with every time she chose Julian over me, with every time she forced me to back down, with every time she refused to acknowledge who I was to her. My voice was hoarse. "Chloe, I haven't forgotten either." At my words, her eyes lit up. "Ethan, I knew you couldn't let me go." I looked at her and continued, "I haven't forgotten how you forced me to sign that release, defending them while you humiliated me with your money, over and over again." With every word I spoke, the color drained further from her face. Her voice was a hoarse whisper, trembling almost imperceptibly. "No, that's not it. I just wanted to protect you." I laughed coldly. "Protect me? Then why is it that every time Julian hurt me, you never once chose my side?" Chloe froze, her mouth opening and closing but no sound coming out. I went on. "You don't even realize it, do you? Because deep down, you're more class-conscious than anyone. The fact that a fishmonger paid for your education must be your most shameful memory. I wasn't good enough for you, which is why you never told me you loved me. I wasn't good enough for you, which is why I was always the one you were willing to sacrifice." I almost laughed, but as the laugh escaped my lips, it turned into a sob, and tears began to stream down my face. 14 years. We had known each other for 14 years, and yet it felt like I was seeing the real Chloe for the very first time. In high school, she had appeared like an angel, defending my fragile teenage pride. My teenage years had been so hard, and for that small bit of warmth she showed me, I had been willing to give up everything, even my own future, just to make her life easier. I cherished her, and so I tolerated everything. And for what? You and Julian really are a perfect match. You're both selfish, manipulative monsters. One of you is arrogant and status-obsessed. The other is cruel and a pathological liar. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my voice. "Chloe, I have never been ashamed of my background. Every penny I've ever earned, I've earned honestly. I can live a good life without you. And so, I don't need your love." There was a moment of silence. Chloe looked up at me, her eyes filled with despair. "Ethan, won't you give me even one more chance?" I answered coldly, "There's no chance for us anymore. Since you were so eager to erase your past, you can leave me there with it." Seeing that she was still following me from a distance, I turned back and said to the broken woman before me, "Stop following me, Chloe. The sight of you makes me sick." As my words hit her, she stumbled, catching herself against the wall before sinking to her knees with a gut-wrenching cry. I felt nothing. I just walked away faster. The next morning, I closed my eyes and tried to rest in the back of a cab on the way to the airport. But just after I had checked my bags, an announcement came over the airport's PA system. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to an unforeseen security situation, the airport is now on lockdown. We apologize for the inconvenience." The terminal immediately filled with the sound of angry complaints. I stood near the security line, looking around in confusion, when my eyes met Chloe's sad, haunted gaze. My knuckles turned white as I gripped my boarding pass. I knew with a sinking certainty that she was behind this. She moved closer, her eyes dark. "Ethan, it's all right. Since you won't give me a chance, I'll just have to make my own." Terrible feeling washed over me. "What are you doing?" Before the words were even out of my mouth, she took off her trench coat, revealing a device strapped to her waist. "A bomb. Come with me and we both live," she said, her voice terrifyingly calm. "Stay, and we all die." I stared at her in horror. "Chloe, this is an airport, not your personal playground." She laughed. "I knew you were too kind, Ethan. I could never put you in such a difficult position." She pressed a remote control into my hand. "This remote has 3 buttons. Red, yellow, and blue. Only one of them will disable the bomb. Everyone's life here, including mine, is in your hands." Her intention was clear. She was holding everyone in the airport hostage to make me stay. She didn't even care about her own life. My pupils constricted. "You're despicable." "I won't do it." I raised my hand to throw the remote away, but she just smiled. "If you do that, it will detonate immediately." I stared at her, my shoulders shaking, and said through clenched teeth, "Chloe, let everyone else leave. Just you and me." Something in my words must have pleased her, because she gave a small smile and nodded to her assistant. Passengers and staff scrambled out of the terminal, and a dead silence fell over the vast, empty space. I stared at her, my resolve hardening. I took a deep breath and pressed the red button. The countdown on the device sped up. Chloe smiled, a fond, indulgent look on her face. It reminded her of the bright red of the wedding dress she'd worn when we went to a haunted house one year. I had lifted her veil myself, and I had thought she was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I pressed the yellow button. The timer cut in half. Chloe's mind drifted to the two of us walking hand in hand through a field of golden tulips. My fingers trembled, but my voice was terrifyingly calm. Let me go. I pressed the blue button. The timer hit 0. A single tear slid from the corner of Chloe's eye. She remembered the misty blue night we first moved into that tiny apartment, when I had carried her on my back and run to the hospital. I had pulled her back from the brink, and she had pushed me into the abyss. The explosion I was expecting never came. Chloe managed a painful smile. You win. I'll let you go. I clenched my fists, furious at having been manipulated. I turned and walked away, but 100 feet away, I heard a deafening blast. Chloe lay in a pool of her own blood, the real detonator still clutched in her hand. I stared at her, my eyes filling with tears. She had pressed the button herself. She had never planned on surviving. The moment I pressed any of those buttons, she had already lost everything. If I had still loved her, I would never have risked her life like that. 1 month later, Wall Street, the news that Chloe was in a coma, with severe brain damage, had shocked the world. When I heard the news, my hands, which were sorting through a case file, paused for a moment, and then continued as if nothing had happened. One night, a very large, anonymous deposit appeared in my bank account. The bank had no information, only that the transfer had been initiated by a Ms. C. I used the money to start a charitable foundation to help underprivileged students afford a college education. I bought a bouquet of flowers and had them sent to Chloe's hospital room. The cost was exactly $500, the same amount she had paid for my class fees all those years ago. The evening wind dried the unshed tears in my eyes. Perhaps a life is like the seasons. Chloe was lost in an endless, snowy winter, so I would have to be the spring and welcome a new beginning.